Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of The Batcave, a series of fast-paced 30-minute political shows aimed at opening the eyes of America to what is currently taking place in our country. I'm your host, Batmobile, and our guest today will be Ernesto Freedom Torch Napoles, a Cuban-born American citizen who lived under Fidel Castro's communist Cuba and who is now an advertising agent for the Torch Media Company in Florida. Welcome to the show, Ernesto.
Hey, Carlos. Good evening. How are you?
Doing good. Ernesto, can you tell us a little bit about your background in Cuba? What do you remember about life under Castro's Cuba?
I could really read a book. I came here at the age of 7, yet in 7 years I lived so much, I saw so much, my family experienced so much, beginning with my dad being a political prisoner. At the age of 2, when I was 2, my dad was arrested. My dad was what they call an anti-revolutionary. He spoke up against the government of Castro. He was a Catholic and wanted to practice his religion. And as of 1959, when Castro took over, religion was outlawed. People don't know that. People don't know that religion was against the law in Cuba until after the visit by Pope Paul in I think it was 1989 or 1991. So for those activities, he went to jail. During the time that he was in jail, I lost my grandfather. I lost a sister who was born there and had congenital heart problems. The only way that my dad was let out of the jail to attend my sister's services was putting a cousin of mine who was in jail as a guarantee in case my dad did not come back. They were going to shoot my cousin. I mean, and you say these things and they seem like so crazy and so foreign to what we know as life in America, but it is what transpired there. It is what happened there. I also remember going to school and the indoctrination that took place. I call it like being a trained SEAL that you would see like at SeaWorld or something to that effect, because you go to school, they put up these great pictures of Fidel, they put up these great pictures of Che Guevara, they put up these great pictures of Lenin and Ho Chi Minh from Vietnam, all these communists, and they would just make these people almost seem like gods. So you couldn't practice religion, but they would take these people and make them out to be gods, and they would make their doctrines and their philosophies to be gods. And here you are, kids, 4 or 5 years old, exalting Fidel and how great life is in Cuba because Fidel is so good to you, yet you're living as a human being on a quarter pound of meat every 9 days. You get a quarter pound of rice every 9 days. You get 2 eggs every 9 days. So people just do not know the reality of what transpired there. The other point that I'll make is that prior to Castro, Cuba was, the most advanced country in the Caribbean. We were the first one to get television sets after the United States. We were a complete modern country, and the completely capitalist-based economy and a thriving economy. It was the Cuban dollar was the equivalent to the American dollar in 1959, and you could research that and find that it's true.
The tourism trade back then was incredible. Because my parents also came from Cuba, and I've seen I've read up on it. It's just incredible. I have home movies when my parents went. So when you look at it, you say, wow, these people, they look as beautiful as people did in America. Everything, and to look at Cuba today, you just can't believe it's the same country, right?
Yeah, it's really difficult. I went back in 1979, not so much by choice. My dad and my mom wanted to go back one more time. Also, you leave a communist country, you really want nothing to do with that communist country until it's free. But then you've got the emotional games of, my mom had her father there. He was elderly. She wanted to see him one last time before he died. He was my grandfather. I wanted to see him. My sister was buried there. So you got these emotional ties that call you back and you go back. And you are transfixed with just the destruction that took place from 1970 to 1979 when we went back. And if you look back at 1959 and you look at it today, it's a city that for the most part is falling apart when you walk in anywhere 2 blocks in the coast. Now the coastline they maintain because it's their tourist trap. It's their it's how they draw dollars. They get money from Spain, Germany, Canadians that travel there. So they do upkeep, and they do have some modernized hotels. But hey, the other thing is the apartheid. It's just like South Africa. There's an apartheid that takes place. Regular Cuban people cannot go into those hotels. It's only for the tourists. So you're living as a citizen. There's a nice hotel, and you can't even step in or walk in. Just part of the system, the psychological abuse that takes place in a society.
It's amazing. Like it's like the citizens are treated like dogs or worse than dogs. You just can't imagine that they would treat their own citizens this way.
Here's a nice another fine example of just how warped the society and the outlook in there is. I have a cousin. I'm going to talk about 2 cousins, but the first one wanted to be a doctor since he was a kid. In Cuba, you don't choose what you become. The state chooses for you. They test you, and based on your academic prowess, you are either accepted or not accepted or directed to go in a different direction. Well, the first one wanted to be a gynecologist, and he made it. He did it. He became a gynecologist. He made more money in Cuba the last 10 years that he lived in Cuba. He's here now. He made more money in Cuba driving a taxi when he got out of the hospital at night than he did as a physician by day.
Amazing.
So you put in 10, 12 years of schooling, and they set a limit into what you can make, and they set a limit in what they pay you. And, he would go out and he would be paid by the government for working at the hospital in Cuban pesos. Well, the tourism in Cuba functions in American dollars. Everybody has to pay with American dollars because that's the currency of the world. That's what they use to buy goods for Cuba, what the government uses. So, people may not understand that every single business in Cuba is owned by the government because that's what communism is. There is no free enterprise. There is nothing that is not owned and wholly, directed by the government. And in the case of my other cousin, committed suicide. This is a young man who fell in love with the revolution, wanted to be an architect. Went to the university. As he got into the university, they said, we don't need architects. You're not going to be an architect. You're going to be an agricultural engineer. Yeah. They made him an agricultural engineer. They sent him to work in the worst places in Cuba. He became so disenchanted with the revolution that he so espoused, the revolution that he defended, the revolution that he lived. I mean, this guy... It's because they've been lied to, Ernesto. We know that. Everybody. It's the ultimate lie. The same thing is what's happening in America today. With all the lies that we hear from the liberals, we don't realize it. Well, and talking about liberals and talking about lies and talking about... This is how this works. This is fairly simple how it works. Communism does not come and hit you with a baseball bat over the head. Communism is a soft incursion into your life to the point where it almost goes unnoticed. Little by little, it eats away at you like a cancer. And that's what Khrushchev said, that socialism, that communism was just not ever going to be able to take over America in a failed swoop, and one big swoop, that little by little, incrementally, it was going to happen. And that's kind of what's happened here. And it begins with the education at the schools, where the kids are not taught history the way it should be, where you're taught and spoken to about social justice. Social justice is the worst 2 words that I could hear in any language. Social justice means that everybody has to be equal, and that's the biggest crock there is. That's wrong. That's what creates the welfare state. That's what creates a state of comfort. That's what creates a state of decay. And I'm going to go back between Cuba and the United States, but people go to work in Cuba today, and what's the incentive? they're getting a set rate no matter what they do, no matter what they create, no matter what they produce. It's the set rate. It's your monthly, and that's what you get.
Right.
And there is no incentive. So there's no incentive. There's no incentive to do anything. There's no incentive to have a little bit of ingenuity. There's no incentive to go out and invent. There's no incentive to take a risk because everything has been decided for you.
Right, you can't better your life.
You know, yeah, and here it's the way that they do that is through the welfare state. You've got people that find comfort in the pennies and shekels that the government provides for them on a monthly basis. They find comfort in their food stamp electronic cards. Now, I didn't even know they had that. A friend of mine was telling me that. So they find comfort in that, and they settle in that, and that's just eats away at the soul and fabric of what America should be. The soul and fabric of what America should be is, in the case of my parents, two folks that came from Havana, high school education, not much of an education, but they came here, they worked 2 jobs, within a year they had their own business. By the time they retired, they had 67 employees. By the time they retired, they had bought and purchased 10, 14, 15 houses. Never took public assistance. That is what really America is all about. And I'll give you a case in reverse. My ex-mother-in-law, when they came here, she was a professional in Cuba. He was a professional in Cuba. They were very comfortable in Cuba. They gave up their comfort for freedom. They came here. They took chances. They didn't want to live in a big city. They came to a small town here in Central Florida, which is where I live, and they made the best of the opportunity that was presented to them. Basically, they became janitors at the school board. This is somebody who was a principal at a school in Havana, and her husband worked for the equivalent of what is Western Union here as a director. Mm-hmm. And they both went to work at that school board, and they worked at that school board for years. That they were smart with their money. They paid off a first house. They bought a second house and paid that off. And they lived comfortably to this day, but they took responsibility for themselves. And that's part of what's lacking here. People are being sold a bill of goods that, hey, it's the state that's going to take care of you. It's the stimulus packages that's going out to the unions that's going to make this better. It's the corporate world that is the enemy. It's you taking a risk on your own that is bad. Let the state take care of you. That's what they want, and that is pervasive. Like I said, that erosion that takes place. It begins with, with government-run health care. It begins with, the EPA controls that we're seeing. It begins with no protection of the border, and what they're doing with the border is...
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. Well, how do you feel about the border, knowing that your parents came here legally and you see all this, the open border policy with all the illegal immigration that's taking place in America today? How does that make somebody like you feel?
Well, I feel the same way about the border that I feel about driving. If I'm going to get behind the car, there's laws to obey, right? And which I often tell my friends. It's like, okay, so why don't we see rallies to allow us to drive drunk, right? I mean, it is. It's a law. You can't drink and drive. But why don't we see rallies for that? The border, it's a tremendous security issue with the Muslim world today. To me, it's a security issue, and it is a legal issue. And that one is more important than the other. They're both equally important. You've got a legal issue and you've got a security issue, and those two things are just so relevant and so important. And the erosion of the border that's taking place, the abandonment of the border by our government, that falls. A lot of people say, "Oh, it's all these Hispanics." Look, it's not about Hispanics. This is about ideology. This is about indoctrination. This is about taking those poor, weak people that come from other countries and getting them used to living on the government dole and creating a political ideal in their head that, hey, it is through communism, it is through socialism, it is through the state that takes care of you that you're going to live better.
The welfare mentality.
The welfare mentality, and they spread it. And, it's kind of funny because when you look at who controls everything, it's the communists are all elite. George Soros is not a guy that works his butt off every day at a regular job. Neither is Barack Obama. Neither is Nancy Pelosi. Actually, her wealth has grown 62% since the time that President Obama came to power. So how does the Speaker of the House gain 62% in her net worth at a time when the country is going down the drain? Well, who knows? But I can tell you that what we're seeing just this week, they were talking about looking at investigations and looking at who got stimulus money and looking at who gave contributions to the president for his political campaigns in 2008, and it's pretty deep stuff when CBS and ABC starts to ask questions of Jake Carney, the spokesman for the president, and starts asking him about why does it seem that money is going to companies and individuals that seem to have really backed Barack Obama in 2008. So you've got that there.
I think if we follow the money trail, of a lot of our politicians, it would go back to the Middle East and China and places where it shouldn't be.
Well, and I don't even call it the money trail. I tend to call it more, Carlos, the corruption trail, which involves a lot of money.
Right.
You've got to link the who's getting the government contracts. You've got to link as to look at what's happening with that's another corruption trail. We had a Border Patrol agent killed in February, Brian Terry, with guns supplied by our own government. That's sickening. That is so sickening.
There's a scandal there with the ATF giving a lot of the weapons to the Mexican drug. I mean, this is just ridiculous.
And again, this is where politics gets ugly. You could blame the guy sitting at the ATF. You could blame the head of the ATF. You could blame Eric Holder. But you know where the buck stops. The buck stops with the president.
Yep.
Just like and hey, everybody tries to clean their messes up. Everybody tries to sweep things under the rug. I remember Oliver North and Ronald Reagan with the Iran-Contra affair, which was a really ugly affair on the greatest president that I've known. But the liberal media did not let that rest. The liberal media did not give that one moment's rest. We had the hearings. We had the hearings on television continuously. And, we are starting to do some hearings on this with what's happened with the gun running in Mexico. But we're really, really not hearing a whole lot much about it. And, my friend, I think that's really serious because we are providing guns for people to come across our own country to shoot our agents and our citizens. That just makes no sense to me other than to say this. It's typical of how socialists and Marxists and communists operate.
Well, that leads me to the next question, Ernesto. I was going to ask you, what do you think? I mean, how do you compare Obama's policies? How do you look at them and say, well, they resemble those of Fidel Castro or, say, Hugo Chavez from Venezuela?
Well, it's kind of funny because when you look at personalities and when you look at systems, I mean, when you look at Cuba, to me, Cuba is a man system. The day Fidel dies, I really honestly think that it's going to be a watershed, and that system is going to go down in a heartbeat. Same thing with Chavez in Venezuela. It's a man system. Chavez is the system. It's going to go down. When I look at Barack Obama, when I look at his total arrogance, when I look at his disregard, the fun example and the most recent example is Libya. We are spending, we have spent more than $1 billion in Libya already.
Right.
We're dropping bombs left and right, but he's saying that we are not involved, and he does not need the permission of the Congress and the citizens.
And why are we even there?
That is a dictatorial act. The second example is look at what happened with health care. You're talking about a program that's going to eat up 17% of your gross domestic product, your GDP.
Right.
And you decide that you can pass that without a vote in the Senate. You're going to pass that by the process of reconciliation which has never been used for such a far-reaching and such an important piece of legislation. And those are just the type of things that Marxist, communist dictators do. They take and they eat up a chunk of power. They eat up a chunk of your freedom at a time.
Right.
And that is what we're seeing. Another fine example, what happened with the what's happening right now with Boeing in South Carolina. Could you imagine? My goodness sake, we're at 9. Oh, he called that a bump on the road, by the way. You know, that uptick in unemployment. That bump on the road. That bump on the road is Americans like you, like me,
and it's just what they're it's just what they're reporting. You know, it's probably a lot higher than what they're reporting. This is just like political
those
games.
that have given up. For example, I'm not statistic because I am out there trying to hustle and trying to make a penny a day with what I do. There was a time when I used to make a great living at what is my profession. That hasn't happened since 2008. And it is a struggle out there, and it is a fight every day out there. But the third point that I was going to make on how they take power and how they squeeze, what happened in South Carolina with Boeing, the entire country is struggling for jobs. Here comes a company that's going to say, I'm going to South Carolina, I'm going to put X millions of dollars to open a plant down there to build airplanes. I'm going to hire 1,000 people. And, they're not going to be union. Who cares? It's a right-to-work state. And you've got the federal government suing them because they are not using unionized workers. Now, that is a shame. That is disgusting. That is so incredibly disgusting to me.
It really is.
Our federal government would attack the private industry for creating jobs.
Well, that's what this whole thing is. It's a war on the private sector. I mean, that's what all this creating government jobs is all about, trying to destroy the public sector in favor of socialism.
And the other thing that I would say, Carlos, too, is that if you look at the history of communist countries, whether it's Russia, whether it's the entire Eastern Bloc in Europe, Hungary, Poland, whether it's Cuba, Nicaragua, and Venezuela, they don't call them unions in those countries. They call those places work syndicates, okay? And I'll tell you how that works. How that works is you join the work syndicate. You are part of the work syndicate. And the work syndicate is going to be treated nicely as long as the work syndicate does what? As long as the work syndicate supports the government, is a clapping seal for the government, and does what the government wants. They will get the government support. So they work hand in hand. They're partners. And that is another parallel here with Obama and how he resembles Castro and Chavez. My friend, he is embedded with those unions. We saw what happened, like I said, just South Carolina, when you look at what's happened in Wisconsin, when you look at what's happened in Ohio with people taking to buses and showing up to protest. It's all part of the communist credo to create upheaval. That's the other piece, to create upheaval, to create uncertainty, to create chaos. That is why you're seeing the trillions of dollars go out the door. That is why you're seeing inflation go up.
So,
I honestly do.
Ernesto, what do you think? To ask you, because you've been there, you know what communism's all about. So, what do you think we can do here in America to save capitalism and freedom before it's gone?
Carlos, it's kind of funny because I'm in the advertising business. I've had a long career before I went out on my own. I had a long career as a marketing manager at Geico. I worked for several big media companies, some of them liberal, I might add. And the biggest way that we could do this is we have to take like an advertising approach. We have to. Do you know what the biggest marketing document that's ever been written is? The biggest marketing document ever written is the Federalist Papers. The Federalist Papers were written to convince the American people during the Revolutionary period to buy into the Constitution, to buy into the ideal of an America independent from England. So what we have to do here is almost go on a marketing campaign. We have to sell America, again, on freedom, on individual responsibility, on pride, on the ideal of our founders. We have to talk, and that's where the advertising part comes in. You have to take it upon yourself. Listen, I am not shy about talking about politics to anybody. I am not shy.
Good for you.
I am not shy. I am not. I will sit and I will talk and I will listen. And, you know, I know on Facebook I come across as pretty wired and pretty abrasive with my thoughts sometimes, but when I sit and I talk to somebody of a different political persuasion and it's face-to-face, unless it's a friend, if it's a liberal friend, then I just blast them because we've been friends for years, chances are. But, you know, I'll sit and I'll have a discussion, and the discussion will, surely I will turn it around to what happens when the incursion, you're for everything that's happening, what happens when the incursion affects you? What happens when it's your right that's affected? What happens when it's your pocket that's hurt? What happens when it's the opportunity of your children and your children's children that is affected because we're headed down the socialist path? So the biggest thing that we can do is we need to empower ourselves as citizens. You know, it's very frustrating to me sometimes. We need to organize 10 million people to the White House and have our own Tahrir Square like they did in Egypt. And have a letter, have a document demanding this is what we want. And it's fairly simple. What we want is a balanced budget amendment in the Constitution. What we want is private health care. What we want is the borders sealed. What we want is no immigration from Islam. What we want is for states' rights to be respected. And we should demand that. Those are not new ideas or new rights. Those are things that exist in our Constitution today, but both parties have abandoned. You've got
and it's common sense. It's common sense, which we no longer see in this country. Where did it go?
Well, and that's the biggest piece. It's common sense. It's a common sense approach to restoring our country. It's a common sense approach to say that we're not going to give money to any country out there that is not an ally. You know what? We've got probably 5 or 10 strong allies in this world. If you're going to give money away, give it to them, but don't give it to anybody else. Why should Egypt get $3 billion? Why should Pakistan, who 3 days ago arrested the people that led us to bin Laden, get $3 billion a year from us? You know?
Outrageous.
I don't understand that.
Anyway, Ernesto, we're running out of time here, but I'd like to thank you very much because this was a really informative show. I mean, you know, you're giving us all your insights of living under Castro's communism and your feelings on today's current situation in America. I mean, this is great, man. Just keep the strength. You know, life will get better. We just got to hang strong, be strong, and together we'll take back this country. We know that. Thank you for being here.
Absolutely. And hey, you know what? Right. I actually want to talk to you again because I am writing a document called Governance and Sensible Governance and Freedom, and I'd like to share that with you sometime. All right?
All right.
Hey, God bless you, Carlos. Thank you for having me.
God bless you.
Take care.
All right.
Bye.
Remember, everyone, freedom is a gift given to us by God, which our founding fathers have passed on to the American people. Such freedom is but a small fraction of life on our planet. It's not something we should take for granted, as America represents the last stand of freedom on earth. So let's do everything we can to preserve it. Until next time, this is Batmobile thanking you for joining us in the Batcave. God bless.